Thank you for joining us this evening for our monthly Arkansas Valley Audubon Society program. I'm Megan Wilbar, Museum Coordinator for the InfoZone Museum at the Rawlings Library. This month we have a recording from the Friends at Bosque del Apache's 2020 Virtual Crane Fiesta. Located in New Mexico, the refuge has an annual crane festival, with this year's being virtual. They have graciously allowed us to share their Duck ID program. Kathy Sandell, a U.S. Fish and Wildlife volunteer at Bosque del Apache, will guide us through common dabblers and divers this evening. Also joining this evening is Dr. Peg Rooney, president of the Arkansas Valley Audubon Society. Thank you for joining us, Peg, and I'll pass it over to you.
Great, thanks, Megan. I want to welcome you all here tonight. And as you know, there's a new federal administration in place that actually cares about the environment, cares about birds, wildlife, and their habitat. But there are a lot of things that need to be undone from the previous administration. And one of the best ways to help with that is to join the Audubon Society. You can find membership on our website, Southern Colorado Birds, abbreviated SOCO, so socobirds.org. We hope you'll consider joining us in our fight to restore protections for birds and their wildlife and their habitats. And now, Megan, we'll turn it over to you for Duck ID.
And welcome to the world of ducks at Bosque del Apache. So my goal with this presentation is to give you an overview of what some of the most common ducks are that you might see here on the refuge if you visit. We do have lots of big flashy birds in the winter that even the non-birders like to come and see, but there's another world going on there. And that's the one I want to share with you today. But before we go any further, this presentation wouldn't happen if it weren't for a lot of volunteer photographers. And so I want to give them credit for the pictures they've taken because they just like the photograph and they've allowed me to share those with you in terms of this ID. Like I said, the refuge has lots of big flashy birds. People come to see the geese and the cranes and they're here right now in huge numbers. But there's an equally spectacular event that often gets overlooked. And that's the ducks. There are actually more ducks on the refuge than there are cranes and geese. So I want you to think about the ducks you've seen recently. Whatever the ones you've seen, which ones you know, what a duck looks like, or get a picture of that duck in your brain. So I'm guessing that mallard may well have been one of the ducks that a lot of you came up with. It's the one that most people know. If you're my generation, you did the Dick and Jane books and they all had mallards in them in first grade. So get a picture of what a duck looks like. So with that in mind, these birds are all waterfowl, they're in water, but any of them ducks. And why or why not? Think about why they might not be ducks. They spend their time in water. So some of the things to look at is the bill shape. Now, these guys have really pointed bills here. Their shape, flat in the water, very round, big body and a small head. Are the males and females the same or are they different? Do they look alike or are they different? You know, like here, these one there's dark. To decide whether a bird is a duck. So we'll start with the definition. So there are various kinds of swimming birds that come from a particular family. They have a broad, flat bill, short legs, and webbed feet. That flat bill and webbed feet. I'm back up. I went off, but I came back up. I think I'm still on, so I'm going to continue. So anyway, the flat bill and the webbed feet are the two things. This flat bill and webbed feet are two key things to tell the ducks from the other waterfowl. So the ducks themselves are sort of divided into two groups. One is dabbling ducks, and those are the ones like this that tip up and feed off the bottom. And the diving ducks that actually dive down to the bottom, get completely underwater to get their food. But the truth is, all ducks can dive and all ducks can tip up. But it's easier for one group to do one thing and the other group to do the other. The mallard is a classic dabbling duck, tips up. So one other field mark for dabbling ducks that you see when they're in flight is a very brightly colored wing patch here. This area is called the speculum. This bird actually has a green and brown speculum. And this is something that the dabbling ducks have that the diving ducks do not have, that brightly colored one. Usually on a dabbling duck, that area is black or gray or white. So if you see a duck flying and you notice any kind of this bright color, you know immediately you're dealing with a dabbling duck. So mallards are our classic dabbling duck. This is what I asked you to take a look at. Females tend to be brown, that's so that they can be concealed when they're nesting. The males are the flashy ones, and they use that to advertise who they are and to attract a mate. A very similar duck to the mallard is this Mexican duck. And up until this summer, the Mexican duck was actually considered a subspecies of mallard, but it was actually split off and given full species status this summer. And it is a very different duck. For one thing, the male and the female look alike, and that's not true for most ducks. That's more like what geese do. The way to tell them apart is the male has this yellow bill, just like the mallard does. The female has a greenish orange bill or olive colored bill. One of the other things that's unique about these particular ducks is that they stay together year round. With most ducks, once the female has laid the eggs, the male duck is gone, never to be seen again. But with these two, they stay together year round. The male helps raise the family. If you're here in the summer and you see this little brood of ducks going along and there's an adult at the front and the back, you're probably dealing with a Mexican duck, if they look like the mallard does. So their range is mostly Mexico, which is where their name comes from. They just get into the United States here in southern Arizona, southern New Mexico, although they are starting to make some inroads into Colorado of late. So this is the Mexican duck, and we actually have quite a few of them here on the refuge. It's a place to see this species in particular. Another duck that's similar to the mallard is this one, and it's called a northern shoveler. It gets its name from this bill, shovel bill, or as the hunters call it, a spoonbill. This duck is a filter feeder, so it actually has little projections along the edge of the bill here that it uses to suck in the water and filter out the food. And because of that bill, the female is one of the few female ducks that's quite easily recognized because she has that same great big bill. So the northern shoveler and the mallard both share a green head and they share orange legs. But the northern shoveler has this big white spot on the front and this red spot on the back, which the mallard does not have. Now, when these ducks come here to the refuge, when they get here in September, early October, this is what the male looks like. He's actually in what's called eclipse plumage. He still has that black and white rear end that you can see here, but the rest of him looks more like the female. But he's going to have a yellow eye, which the female doesn't have. If you look at this, you see two of these birds together and one of them has a yellow eye. You're dealing with this eclipse plumage male. The third big duck on the refuge in terms of numbers is this northern pintail. And it's named the pintail because of this long tail that sticks out. And that long tail, along with the long neck, gives it a very unique silhouette. So I find that the female pintail is another female that's easy to identify. She's a light brown color. She has a long neck and she has this much longer body. She's not as chunky or stocky. She's much more elegant looking than the other ducks happen to be. And the male is quite handsome with his chocolate head and this long white spot, white streak that goes up his neck. And if you're close enough, his bill is actually a really pretty blue color. And again, because of that long shape, they're easier to identify in flight. They give you a silhouette, this long silhouette and that pointed tail and the head stretched way out in front. So the northern pintail and the shoveler and the mallard, those three species make up about 90% of the ducks that winter here in the refuge. So this is one that you'd have a pretty good idea of, pretty good chance of seeing when you got here, because there's lots and lots of them. In fact, right now, pintails, there are far more pintails out there than there are shovelers or mallards. There are pintails everywhere right now in huge numbers. So those are our three biggest ones, but there are other ones that we see around. This is our smallest dabbling duck. It's known as a green-winged teal. And if you saw this bird in flight, you'd know where it got its name because its speculum is green. Oftentimes, this bird can be picked out if you're just scanning out over the flight deck pond and looking out on the water because it's so much smaller than any of the other birds are, any of the other ducks that are out there. So if you find this really small one, particularly if it's tipping up as opposed to diving, you're probably dealing with a green-winged teal. The male has a beautiful red head with a green eye swoosh, but that can only be seen if the sun actually hits it just right. Otherwise, it looks just dark. So the best field marks for this particular duck is this yellow butt. And again, the hunters call this duck a butterbutt because of this yellowish color on the butt and this white vertical line that's here on the shoulder. So those would be your best field marks for this green-winged teal. Another duck that's here right now, well, actually, there were 250 of these down on the boardwalk the day before yesterday for some reason. Normally, this is a duck that's here in huge numbers in the spring. We always have a few here in the winter, but it's not here in great numbers until we get in the spring. I don't know what brought them all in this fall, but I don't know where they're going to stay. But I can tell you that the pond at the boardwalk was covered with them the other day. But this is the gadwal, and it's actually one of my favorite ducks. From a distance, it looks pretty gray, pretty nondescript, and that's actually a good way to identify it, is that it is nondescript at a distance, and it doesn't have any white on it. Almost all of our other duck species have white on them somewhere. This duck only has white here on the speculum and on the belly, which you can't see when it's in the water. But if you get a closer look at this bird, it's really quite pretty. It has pink and it has gray. It has this really nice tweed pattern here on the gray in the front part of it. So this is a gadwal. The female is kind of hard to tell by herself unless you get a peek at this white speculum that sticks out here. Otherwise, her sort of overall shape. There's a gadwal anywhere in the area. Or again, she doesn't have any distinctive features, and so that's another way to pick her out. American widgeon is a duck that's here all winter. Its numbers get larger in the spring. Oftentimes they're in the canal rather than out in the big open pond areas. The male is quite striking with this white mohawk up on top of his head. And the green, he has the same green swoosh that the green-winged teal has. Again, that green is not very easily seen unless the sun hits it just right. But he has a pinkish wash. In fact, both the male and the female have kind of a pinkish cast to them. But his rear end is black and white versus the gadwal, which is all black. But this white mohawk is by far the easiest thing to see. He has a bright blue bill with a black tip on it. So those are some field marks to look for. The female, because of that sort of pinkish tinge, I'm able to pick her out because the other females seem to be browner. They don't have that pink coloring to them. She has a very round head that's gray. And the shape of the bill on the widgeon is a little bit different than some of the others. They're all flattened, which is a characteristic of ducks. But it has, sometimes will have this blue cast that the male has also. And this is a lot of people's favorite ducks. They're incredibly colorful. They're here in the fall, but in the fall, the male and the female look alike. They look like this. And so they're not as noticeable in the fall. Come around January, when they start coming in and the male starts getting this red color, then we start finding them. And it's always something that as volunteers, we start looking around the end of January to see who's going to spot the first cinnamon teal. Well, by the end of April, there are hundreds and hundreds of them on the refuge, and they're pretty easy to see. But they really are all cinnamon colored, including the male's red eye. I will say in the fall, if it's an adult male, he'll look like this female, except he'll have a bright red eye. It's a way to find him in the fall. But in the spring, they're pretty easy to find because of this. This is a western bird. So this is one of the ducks in particular that people are looking for when they come out here. Because most of the other ducks that are here, you can find in the eastern part of the US or in the Central Flyway. These cinnamon teal are kind of unique to being out here. These ducks are called teal, as is the green-winged teal. But the cinnamon teal's nearest relative actually happens to be the shoveler with that great big bill. And in relation to its body and to other birds, the cinnamon teal does have a very large bill. And if you have a mixed flock in the fall of blue-winged teal and cinnamon teal that all look like this large bill is actually pretty obvious that it's that much larger and can be used to pick it out, even in a silhouette. Like I said, it's not as big as a shoveler, but it's pretty good sized. So our other group of ducks that we have here on the refuge are called diving ducks. And again, these are the ones that dive down and feed off the bottom. The refuge doesn't manage for wintering diving ducks, but because of areas of deep water, like here at the boardwalk, or at the southwest corner of most of the units where the water actually goes out of the unit, there's deeper water. Off the dabbler deck is a good location for that. You'll find lots of diving ducks there, and people want to know why it's called the dabbler deck. Well, that's normally a dabbler unit, except right in front of the deck. And there's deeper water there, and the diving ducks have found it. The other place they show up is the drive to the flight deck, and there's a deep channel that actually parallels that road. And the diving ducks have learned that. And so that's where they can be found. So we do have, not in large numbers, but we have 6 or 8 species that are here all winter. One of the more numerous diving ducks is this one, and it's also one of the most visible because of this bright black and white plumage that it has. And this is our bufflehead. The male is quite bright with black and white, and if you catch the sun just right, he gets this iridescent red and green here on the neck. The female has the same shape with that big head. This is someone thought this one looked like a buffalo head, this bird did. And at one point, I think it was called the buffalo head bird. But now we just call it the bufflehead. She has that same shape, but she just has that small white spot on her cheek. So these are fairly animated ducks. They're fairly bright. That big head gives them a distinctive look. So with their activity, they're sort of the chickadees of the duck world. Let's see if that we go. Had a little delay there in changing the slides. So another one of our diving ducks, one that's red and that's quite small, is a ruddy duck, and they're here in pretty good numbers also. The ruddy duck has an even wider bill than most ducks do. Let's look at, this is what they look like. This is their winter plumage, and this is what they look like in the winter. It's this very wide bill, and both male and females are brown. This one happens to be a female. She has this white line that runs through her eye. The male shows what's going to become a white patch in the summer, this area here. So you can't tell male and female apart on them even in the winter. But again, in the spring, we start looking for when the ruddy duck, the first ruddy duck that's starting to turn red and getting the sky blue bill. They have a white face and they have a black head. They're pretty spectacular color-wise. They also have a pretty spectacular courtship. This black here on the head actually stands up and becomes spikes. They fit right in with the younger generation today. And he pounds this blue bill against his chest, puts his head up, and he just throws water everywhere. It's quite a spectacular courtship act when he gets in his full plumage. They're actually known as a stiff tail, and they get tail that sticks out usually at about a 45-degree angle. It's pretty stiff. Most ducks, you just don't have much of a tail and you don't notice it. So we have two similar diving ducks that are here in small numbers. The first one I want to talk about is this redhead. Both of them have red heads. The other duck happens to be a canvasback, but they both have a red head. They've got black hair on the front and they have a light body. But the redhead's body is gray. And in that red head, there is a yellow eye. The female has that same shape, but she's brown. She's got a little bit of white here at the base of the head, base of the bill. But she's one of the harder females to pick out without a male around. The other similar looking bird is this canvasback. Again, he's got a red head, a black front, a black butt, but his body is pure white here. And his bill is black and it slopes from the forehead right down his head. We call it a ski slope nose. He's also large. He's probably the largest duck you're going to see out here. If he and the redhead are side by side, he is considerably larger. The female has that same bill shape, which makes her another female that's fairly easy to identify, but she has just a very brown body. She has none of that color pattern, none of the red that he has. So here's a test for you. Which one is which? They both have the red head, they both have the black front, they both have the black tail. So one has a grayish body, one has a white body, one has a bluish bill and a round head, and the bill comes off of it. And the other one, the bill starts at the top of the head and comes all the way down and has a peaked head. So the one on the left is your canvasback. It's the larger one. The one on the right is the redhead. You notice there's the yellow eye on the redhead, and the canvasback has a red eye. So there's several ways to tell this apart, but at first look, people often get them confused. Uh-oh. Whoop, there we're back. So we have two other ducks that are similar, ringneck duck and the scaup, lesser scaup. This is the ringneck duck. It has a ring around the bill. It has this pattern on the side that some call it a whale, some call it a Nike swoosh, or some look at this and say, oh, it's a peaked house, like a little child would draw a house with that peak on it. These are marks that the lesser scaup does not have. It also has a very black back. Both the male and the female have this very black back here. So you may ask, how come it's called a ringneck and not a ring bill? Well, the ornithologist who named this bird saw this ring around the neck as much more obvious than the ring on the bill. And it's one of those things that's a factor of light. And the light hits it just right. It's an iridescent. You can actually see the ring on the neck. These other ducks, you can't see that ring on the neck. So the female, as with most female ducks, is very brown. She has a white ring around her eye that can be very distinctive and kind of a little line that comes off that eye. And then a very thin mark, white line here around the bill. But she also has that two-toned bill. It's not near as bright as the males, but it is visible. So the other one that looks very similar is this lesser scop. And again, it has some white on the sides, but the back is gray on this particular duck. There's no ring around the bill. It's blue. In fact, the hunters call this a blue bill for that reason. The female has more white around her bill than the female ringneck does, but she does not have that ring around the eye. They're about the same size. They're both diving ducks. They're found in the same way. You can often see both of them together off the dabbler deck or off the boardwalk when they're out there. So here's another test. So 2 of these birds are lesser scop and 2 of these birds are ringneck ducks. I'll give you a minute to think about what we're looking at. One of them is that pattern on the side, and the other is the color of the back, and to a lesser extent, the shape on the heads, which is more visible in the females, the peak versus the very rounded head. So this is the male ringneck duck. This is the male lesser scop with the grayer back. This is the female lesser scop, and this is the female ringneck who also has a ring around the bill and that ring around the eye. 2 similar ducks and often seen together. But for me, this particular mark right here is the most obvious way to tell the ringneck. I can see that at a distance when I can't tell the bill at all, but I can see that peak right there. So that's the end of the common ducks that are here. It's been a brief overview, the ones that you're more likely to see. And certainly, as we say with most birding, when you start looking at a group of birds like ducks, look at your common ones first, get to know them really well. And then when something different shows up, you'll be able to say, oh, that one's different. And then you can go looking at it, go looking for it. One of the things on this particular bird right here, this bird is identifiable, although all you can see is the butt. Think about which one has that long pointed tail. And that will tell you which this bird is, even though you can't see anything else. It does happen to have yellow legs, which I'm not sure I'm seeing. But this is the northern pintail with that long pintail. So are there any questions? If you have questions, if you type.
As this isn't a live recording, we won't be having a Q&A this evening, but you can find more information at friendsofbosquedelapache.org. And we thank them for allowing us to share their content this evening. And thank you for joining us this evening. And our next Audubon program is set for February 25th, Raptor ID with Debbie Barnes. So we'll see you then. Thank you so much.